To be able to make authentic, meaningful paintings that come from ourselves, we need to have a sense of our own inner voice. And one of the best ways of getting in touch with that is through intuitive paintings. There's kind of two intuitive types of paintings that I like to do. One that I find is like generative of ideas, like image idea generation. And the second that's more body based and is actually a good way to remove like blocks and fears from our body. So in this video, I'm going to talk about both. We have been conditioned to feel that who we are and what we think is wrong. We've learned to stuff down our feelings and our natural impulses. But to find our artistic voice, we have to reconnect with the wholeness of our being. So this week, we'll be using the practice of intuitive painting to tap into our gut responses and shine light on neglected parts of ourselves while tapping into a state of creative flow. So, like many of the artists that I've worked with, my experience growing up and being socialized into this world taught me to bury my voice. Unconsciously, I learned to ignore my feelings and intuition so that I could be accepted by others. And these experiences led me to stifle my creativity and second guess my thoughts, inhibiting my authentic creative expression. When I completed my MFA and started teaching, I found myself being envious of the beginners in the class because they embodied this like free sense of play, in their approach to painting. And that was something that I deeply longed for because my approach had become really rigid and just so logical. I remembered when I was a kid and a teenager and my creativity just like flowed so freely. But as time passed and I developed technical skills, which I needed to do, and kind of accumulated like art pains and art career disappointments, I just found myself getting more and more blocked. Luckily, a little while after completing my MFA, I discovered intuitive painting from Damini Celebre's book, Painting the Landscape of Your Soul. And immediately I got excited about it, knowing that this would totally transform my practice. So I bought a roll of white craft paper, which she talked about, and some children's acrylic paints. And I started to do one intuitive painting every single day. I would do them on the floor because I found that that kind of enhanced the sense of kid-like sort of playfulness. So the key with intuitive painting is just to basically listen to your first gut impulse and do that. Just hear it, and don't question it. Don't think about it. Just do whatever your first thought is, and then do the next thought and the next thought, and just let your inner child play. And you can spend as long as you want on this, like 10 minutes is totally sufficient. And sometimes you might get lost in it and just, time will pass. And that's really beautiful too. So I did these intuitive paintings every day for a few months, maybe even a year. Like they might have started to dwindle off after a few months. And some of my intuitive paintings looked like really bad, and that's totally okay. But some actually looked pretty cool. And a couple of them I really was like intrigued by, and they actually became almost like studies for larger paintings. Like the one that's behind me here, it actually started out as an intuitive painting, which I just thought was like really so interesting. And then I had to sort of develop the skill to sort of figure out how to like supplement this initial idea that I sort of done in the intuitive painting and bring it to this final finish of like this is a 9 feet by 5 foot painting behind me. But the goal isn't to create an intuitive painting that will become a study. The goal is totally just to listen to your first gut impulse and to connect to your intuition. And you can also use intuitive painting to help move stuck emotions like blocks and shadow aspects of ourselves. We each have a persona that we present to the world and parts of ourselves that we kind of hide from the world. We don't think they'll be accepted. And we bury like the shame and the pain and just all of the like difficult feelings sort of inside of us for so long that we forget that they're there sometimes. Michael Singer, the author of The Untethered Soul, says that when we close ourselves off to emotions and we don't like process them and face them and sort of stay open to them, they remain trapped inside of us and sort of accumulate until there's more and more stored pain. And to release the burden of these unprocessed events, we need to like feel them to process them and just let them move through us. And so intuitive painting can be kind of a somatic approach to healing in that way, in that you kind of like connect to the feeling that's sort of stuck, some stuck energy like inside of you, and then kind of engage in a conversation with it, ask it like what color and shape it wants to be, and sort of do that in your intuitive painting, and then, follow its next direction and kind of let it itself kind of come out and express itself through the intuitive painting. In her book, Painting the Landscape of Your Soul, Damini Celebre says that our intuitive self knows how to heal and bring, these shadow parts of ourselves into the light and heal them. And I had an experience with this where there was a block that I was feeling where I was basically just feeling like a fraud, feeling like a copycat, and like I have like no real voice of my own. And as I tuned into my body to sense where the tightness was, I located it as being like in my belly, which is the second chakra, and also happens to be like connected to creativity. But you can get blocks all over. I've also had them sort of in my throat chakra, so they can be anywhere, but in this case, I was noticing it in my belly, like just below my navel. Um, and so I sort of did this practice of like calming myself and sort of breathing into that area and just connecting with that area where I feel the blocked energy, and then sort of conversing with it. And so asking it like what color and what shape it wants to be. And I got this like the color, it was like brown mixed with yellow ochre, like the grossest, muddiest, gross color that you can possibly imagine. Like it wanted to be really gross. Um, and then as far as how to put it on the painting, it was like it wanted to be globbed on, like really thick, so it looked as gross as possible. And of course, I was like, in the back of my mind, I was like, oh darn, like I was hoping this would be a kind of cool, intuitive painting, but I'll just do it. So I globbed on the gross, muddy, like crap looking color. And then after getting globbed on, it kind of wanted to be scribbled around to kind of like release some of the frantic energy that was like knotted up inside my belly. And then the next like directive was to use like black and sort of make these like slice marks, into it, sort of jabbing into this brown mess. And then as I tuned in next, I got like red, but it wanted to be laid down like really flat and clean, sort of framing this like gross mess. But as I was doing that, some like little drips of water mixed with black that were sort of deep within my brush kind of dripped into my nice flat red. And I noticed myself like almost wanting to start crying. Like I felt really disappointed that these like, or just a little bit, I just noticed this little twinge of like sadness inside and frustration inside me as I noticed these drops go into my nice flat application of red. But again, I remembered that we have to kind of go with it. Like, so instead of going back and trying to flatten out that, I could have painted over those black drips, but I just like let them be and knew it was part of the process. And feeling that little bit of sadness was also an important part of the process. Um, and then after the red, I felt like the next guidance was to do these like white teardrop shapes sort of on top of the whole thing, because Damini Celebre always says in her book Painting the Landscape of Your Soul about intuitive painting, like ruin it early and ruin it often. So I actually started to think it looked a little bit cool as I was laying down the red, but the teardrops were going to go like on top of everything. So it was like, oh, it might kind of ruin what's happening here. But you want to, just ruin it early and ruin it often. So I thought, okay, I'll put these white teardrop shapes. And it was like really thick white, but it started to mix into the red because it was all getting quite thick at this point. And again, I felt this like frustration like welling up inside me, like it wasn't going as I planned, everything was getting muddy. And again, I realized that's part of what's coming up here, like sort of feel that emotion, just let it be like, okay, the white's mixing in with the red and it's getting a little muddy, you know, um, because these feelings that come up are totally like part of the process of releasing the situation. And I started to kind of notice that it was this perfectionism that was coming up inside of me and this frustration when it wasn't like perfect. And then I felt guided to add blue, which again, I was like, I don't think that mixes with the color scheme. We've got this kind of red, black, brown, like warm kind of colors going on. Like blue is going to ruin it. But again, like you don't think about that. It's not the goal to like create anything that's like harmonious. Maybe the goal is to like create something that's not harmonious. So I like put down the blue. It turned out that I actually thought it looked kind of cool, but it really doesn't matter. And then the center area was getting like muddier and muddier. And again, I was like, okay, lean into it, make it more muddy. So I took the wet palette that I had and put it down on the painting and sort of smeared all the paint in and around. And I started to then notice that I was like kind of starting to lose a little bit of interest in the process, because that's the other thing, is paying attention to your own energy. Like sometimes our inner critic, say we're happily painting along, we're kind of enjoying the process, and then suddenly our inner critic is like, oh, maybe you'd like to just go up and get some tea. It just takes you away from what you're enjoying. So then stay with the process. Just, don't get up, don't go, just stay with it if you're enjoying it. But I noticed that I started to feel like, I'm kind of losing interest, and that's fine. Like, and so I knew it was starting to wrap up, because my actual internal energy of joy was starting to kind of dwindle. And I felt like this kind of intuitive impulse to scratch with my finger into this thick, muddy mess, a little heart shape. And that I felt like was the completion of the painting. But what I really got from doing this was that I came to it thinking that my block was like that I feel like a fraud, and that I have, I'm afraid that I have no voice. And I came out of it with this deeper understanding. I think having like released that stuck energy in me, and also a deeper understanding of the issue, which was more around this perfectionism that I was kind of harboring. And then what happened in my studio practice is I started to notice that I could make these bold brush strokes, maybe working large and really kind of vigorous at first, and just like let that be for a while, and even let some of those brush strokes show through to the finished painting, rather than having to kind of niggle around with everything, like needing it to look absolutely perfect. And actually, a lot of my favorite artists have some looser, bold brush work, in them, but I hadn't been able to let myself just leave that because it didn't feel perfect. I wasn't sure if it worked. And so it kind of freed me up in that way. So intuitive painting is like really powerful, and it works for all disciplines too. Like even if you're a sculptor, you can still do intuitive paintings to kind of generate ideas and also kind of move stuck energy. This like intuitive approach to creating has its roots in the surrealist movement of the 20th century, where artists would use forms of automatism to generate ideas for their work, sort of allowing chance and their subconscious to kind of reveal aspects that were like repressed within their subconscious. And you can also experiment with different forms of intuitive creation too, if you'd like there's a sculptor that I know, Kelsey Tynick, that uses an intuitive collage as well as like automatic drawing, often kind of scribble, the type of drawing, to generate ideas for her large scale sculptures and installations. And she says that it really brings like her intuition into her work, and this sense of play, like and it really helps generate ideas for her work. And interestingly, another sculptor that I know, Sherlyn Hendrick, says that when she created her iconic series of sculptures that paired an animal with an emotion, she kind of initiated this like self-imposed game for herself, where the only rule was that like if she had a thought, she had to do it. And so she was really bringing this connection to her intuition into her actual like finished sculptures. So for example, like the first, animal that popped into her head was anxiety rabbit, pairing like a rabbit with anxiety and sort of sculpting this anxiety rabbit. And it just went from there. And she said it was like surprising, like she never knew where it was going to go, but she just kept following it until she had this amazing body of work created. So yeah, as we connect to our intuition more by doing intuitive paintings, we'll also find that we're getting intuitive nudges in our regular studio practice. And that's something that Julia Jenkins, an artist that I've worked with, also experienced when she created her painting Solar Sorceress. She was painting a woman holding a crystal ball, and midway through the process, she got this spontaneous idea that what if she changed the crystal ball to be a sun? And she just followed that impulse and went with it. And that ended up being the first painting that she'd ever created where she was like, this really feels like my voice. Like it was also a really strong painting, and it was really well received. The video that she made of the process got 5 million views on Instagram and generated all these commissions and got her like so many follows. But really most importantly was the fact that she really knew this was her voice, and she's gone on to create all these other paintings where there's kind of a glowing object. It really has that mystical feel that she'd been like wanting to express in her work. And I found that too through the practice of daily intuitive paintings. I discovered that my inner voice was like weaving its way into my finished artwork more and more as well. And it would often occur to me just as this small little question in the back of my mind, which I have to pay attention to, like I wonder what would happen if I add this, or I wonder how this color would look, or like what about this element, you know? And if I just follow those inner prompts, and they can be very small, but if I just notice these questions that are coming to my mind and just try them out, it'll like lead my paintings on unexpected journeys, and I just never know where they'll end up. So this process of doing intuitive paintings can move energy that's stuck in your body and also help generate ideas for future work and connect you to a deeper sense of your own intuition that'll guide you in your own practice. So your assignment this week is to start doing intuitive paintings daily and to continue them throughout the course.